Some people cry when they're heartbroken. Some cry during a movie they've already seen 10 times. And some cry because a complete stranger is suffering somewhere they've never been. Most people look at those tears and assume the same thing: weakness. But psychology has uncovered something far more surprising. The people who cry the easiest are often experiencing something that most of us never even notice. Not more emotion, something deeper than that. And for decades, we've been misunderstanding what those tears actually mean. Because what if crying isn't a sign that someone is falling apart? What if it's evidence that they're picking up on something everyone else is missing? And if that's true, why do some people seem wired this way from the very beginning? Most people never question why crying feels so uncomfortable. From childhood, we're taught the same lesson. Stop crying, be strong, don't be so sensitive. Over time, those words teach us something dangerous. Not that crying is painful, but that crying is wrong. And that's where the misunderstanding begins, because researchers notice something unusual. When two people experience the exact same event, they don't necessarily experience the same emotional reality. One person simply sees what happened. Another feels the weight of it, the meaning of it, the human story behind it. And sometimes, that difference alone is enough to bring tears. So maybe people who cry easily aren't experiencing more emotion. Maybe they're processing more information from the same moment. And that raises a much bigger question. Why are some people wired to do that in the first place? The answer may begin with something psychologists call sensitivity, not emotional weakness, sensitivity. Research suggests that some people are naturally more responsive to emotional information than others. Their brains notice more, their nervous systems absorb more, and as a result, experiences often feel more intense. A sad story isn't just a story. A painful memory isn't just a memory. The emotional impact stays longer and travels deeper. But here's where most people get it wrong. They assume tears are the problem. In reality, tears may simply be the visible result of a system that's processing more than average, like an alarm light on a dashboard. Tears are often a signal, not a defect, not a malfunction. A signal that something meaningful has been registered. And this doesn't only happen with sadness. Many people who cry easily also tear up from beauty, gratitude, relief, kindness, or even overwhelming joy, which reveals something important. People who cry easily aren't just more sensitive to pain, they're often more sensitive to emotion itself. And that sensitivity can shape the way they experience other people in ways most of us rarely notice. This is where sensitivity turns into something much more powerful and much more complicated. Most people assume empathy is simply understanding how another person feels. But for some people, it goes far beyond understanding. They experience it. A slight crack in someone's voice. A smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. A silence that feels heavier than it should. Most people notice these things and move on. But here's the difference. Highly sensitive people often struggle to separate themselves from what they notice. They don't just observe emotion, they absorb it. And once that emotional information enters their awareness, it's difficult to ignore. That's why a stranger's pain can feel strangely personal. Why a heartbreaking story can linger for days. Why some people cry over experiences that never even happened to them. But there's an unexpected consequence. When you constantly absorb the emotional signals around you, the world becomes impossible to experience at the surface level. Everything carries more meaning, more emotional weight, more impact. And that may be the real reason people who cry easily often seem so deeply affected by life itself. But why does life seem to affect them so deeply? The answer may have less to do with emotion itself, and more to do with what emotion becomes. For many people who cry easily, feelings rarely stay isolated. A moment doesn't remain a moment. A feeling doesn't remain a feeling. Everything connects to something else. A sad story can trigger memories. A memory can awaken an old relationship. That relationship can bring back hopes, regrets, fears, or dreams that seemed long forgotten. And suddenly, one small emotional experience becomes something much larger. Most people feel an emotion and move on. But some minds automatically build meaning from it, not consciously, not intentionally, almost automatically. They don't just experience what happened, they experience what it represents, what it reminds them of, what it says about life, loss, love, connection, or themselves. And that's why tears are often misunderstood. People see a reaction to a single moment. What they don't see is the entire chain of meaning unfolding beneath the surface. But there is a hidden downside to living this way. Because when emotions become deeply connected to meaning, they become much harder to leave behind, because some emotions refuse to leave. The moment ends, but the feeling stays. And for some people, that's where the real struggle begins. The hardest part isn't feeling, it's stopping. A conversation gets replayed long after it's over. A painful memory returns when it should have faded. A stranger's story lingers for days, sometimes weeks. Not because they want to hold on to it, because their minds are still working on it, still searching for meaning, still connecting pieces that others never noticed. And that's the hidden cost of emotional depth. The deeper an experience feels, the harder it becomes to put down. But here's what most people misunderstand. What looks like overreacting is often something entirely different. The emotional process simply hasn't finished yet. The mind is still trying to understand what the experience meant. And that changes everything, because people who cry easily aren't always trapped by emotion. They're often trapped by meaning. The same depth that allows them to feel extraordinary empathy and connection can also make certain experiences almost impossible to forget, which raises an even bigger question. If emotional depth creates so much pain, why would the human mind evolve it at all? But emotional depth doesn't only create costs, it creates advantages too. Advantages that most people never notice. Because the same sensitivity that makes emotions harder to escape also makes certain things easier to detect. A change in someone's mood, a hidden disappointment, a struggle that hasn't been spoken out loud. Many people miss these signals entirely, but highly emotional people often pick them up almost immediately. Not because they're psychic, because they're paying attention to information others filter out. And over time, that ability can become surprisingly powerful. They often recognize tension before conflict appears. They sense distance before a relationship begins to break. They notice pain before someone asks for help. In other words, emotional sensitivity isn't only about feeling more, it's also about seeing more. And that changes the way they move through the world. The people who cry easily are often the people who listen carefully, who notice subtle changes, who understand what others are trying to say, even when no words are spoken. But here's the fascinating part. These advantages may seem completely unrelated to tears, yet they all come from the same source, the same emotional depth, the same sensitivity, the same ability to absorb what others overlook. And once you see that connection, an even bigger picture begins to emerge. And that's the connection most people never make. The sensitivity that creates emotional pain is the same sensitivity that creates empathy. The same depth that makes experiences harder to forget also makes human connection possible, which means tears may not be evidence of weakness at all. They may be evidence of awareness, a sign that someone has felt the weight, meaning, and humanity inside an experience that others simply passed by. So the next time you see someone cry easily, remember this. You may not be looking at someone who feels too much. You may be looking at someone who notices more, feels more, understands more. And perhaps that has been the real meaning of tears all along. If this video gave you a new perspective on emotions and human behavior, subscribe for more psychology insights that help you understand yourself and the people around you.